So, thank you all for coming, and I would like to open our event today. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming to this Ralph Dahrendorf Roundtable, Populism, Ante, Portas, organized by Republikon Institute with the support of the European Liberal Forum. My name is Csaba Tóth. I'm Director of Strategy for Republikon Institute. I'm also a member of the board of the European Liberal Forum, which is organizing or helping organize this event. So I'm here on a dual capacity, so I will be doing two things now. Oh, that's all right, to open this event. First, I have to, and I will talk a bit about the European Liberal Forum in just 2 minutes so that you're all acquainted with how this event is organized. And then I will give sort of an introductory remark on our main topic, that is populism, and how liberals can go and combat this phenomenon. But again, thank you all for coming, and thank for all of our guests who've come here from Hungary or abroad and who will be introduced by Dániel Mikecz later on. And of course, thanks MAGVETtomn CAFÉ for this wonderful new place. This is our first event, not here specifically, because we've had events in the predecessor of this cafe in Hátsó Kapu, but this is our first event here, and I'm sure we will have some more events. So a few words about the European Liberal Forum. The European Liberal Forum, who is co-sponsoring this event, is a collection of think tanks from throughout Europe, of liberal think tanks. The European Liberal Forum is the party foundation of the ALDE party, which is, of course, the liberal party in the European Parliament. Even Hungarian guests are sometimes familiar with Mr. Verhofstadt, who is leading the ALDE group in the European Parliament. It's, of course, a vocal opponent of Mr. Viktor Orbán. The European Liberal Forum is a decentralized network of think tanks throughout Europe. It has members which are officially affiliated with one or more liberal parties, like Neoslab from Austria. And it has other members, like Republikon in Hungary, which is not affiliated with any liberal party. And the European Liberal Forum does analyses, policy suggestions, and research, and I have the honor of being one of the board members of this institution. If you're interested in more information, we have leaflets about the European Liberal Forum. We also have a few contributions from some of our partners. All the publications you see here are yours to take. About this event, and this is my main role here, to give some food for thought for our guests around this table. Our event is called Populism, Ante, Portas, and we try to deal with strategies on how to deal with populism. Now, when we started organizing this event last year in 2016, or at least the topic in 2016, as this event specifically was organized this year, but a year ago, it looked like populists were sweeping across Europe. You had the Brexit referendum. You had far-right parties and populist parties gaining more and more popularity throughout Europe. We in Hungary talked mainly about populists on the right, but in some countries, in Greece, for instance, or in other southern European countries, you saw populists on the left as well. And it looked like mainstream liberal parties and even mainstream social democratic parties were on the losing side of this worldwide trend. If we looked outside of Europe, if you looked at the United States, for instance, and the election, of course, of Donald Trump, it looked very much like the time is going to go into the populist direction, that the world is going to be so many more Trumps and so much, or so fewer Merkels in the future. This is what we thought in 2016. This was the time when our Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, said, well, 2017 was going to be the year of revolution. And by revolution, he basically meant an anti-establishment revolution, a revolution against what he called the liberal elites of Europe. Now that we came to this event, we find ourselves maybe in a lot more fortunate times. We find ourselves in times when liberals and anti-populists are coming back, are gaining ground again, with different strategies on how you combat these illiberal forces. And what I believe this event to be a bit about is trying to discuss the issue of how you can actually find political answers to these populist challenges. What's the secret behind it? Is there a secret behind it? Or can we see different strategies being successful? The two most notable examples, for us liberals, of course, are the French elections, the election of President Macron, who is, of course, often called a centrist or a radical centrist or a liberal. The Dutch elections, which saw the return of a liberal Prime Minister Rutte, and also a very good showing by a smaller liberal party, a social liberal party, D66. But if you look at the German elections as well, you see a strengthening of the position for the German Liberal Party, FDP. Now, these are maybe the more important or more relevant countries that we are familiar with. There are other stories. In the United Kingdom, things are not necessarily going in that specific direction. But I think you can see successful liberal strategies. And I will invite the participants to maybe discuss how those strategies can be successful and what we see there. But just as food for thought, when I prepared for this and when I tried to look at what are some of the strategies that liberals can follow, I think you can identify three strategies that liberals try. The first is co-optation. The first is trying to understand some of the concerns of the populist and also trying to go a bit over there, to try to get some of their messages, to try to say, well, yes, immigration is a problem. Yes, the welfare state isn't working. Maybe going even farther than would be normal for any liberal party. The most famous example, of course, is the VVD. The VVD in the previous Dutch elections is very often criticized for winning the elections by offering a very similar program to the illiberal parties. Very often you would hear, well, VVD in the Dutch elections was only successful because they said very similar things to Wilders' party. They said things like immigrants shouldn't come to our country. They had anti-Turkey rhetoric. They had anti-Muslim rhetoric. Now, I believe those to be a bit unfounded charges. If you look at what VVD actually said at that election, they said, if you're an immigrant and if you come to our country, you have to respect our laws. Now, I would argue that that's very different from what, for instance, Viktor Orban is saying, which is, let's build a fence and not let anyone inside the country. I think that's very different. But I think the debate is there. Is there room for liberals to be more, I would say, maybe patriotic, more in line with some of the sentiments that you're seeing there? Of course, a big concern there is, how far do you go? We all know of examples of parties which started out liberal, but in the process of accommodating anti-liberal positions became the very thing they detested. I mean, Hungarian Fidesz is one of the best examples. Fidesz starting out as a liberal party, going more and more conservative, more and more populist, that now it became the very thing it detested. Of course, you can argue how liberal Fidesz was in the early 1990s. But still, the argument remains, if you go too far in this direction, maybe there is no coming back. And I don't know if the Austrian case will be mentioned in this example, but the Freedom Party had some liberal roots back in the 70s, back in the 80s. You have seen examples in which liberal parties, usually by the way of being free market, by the way of being, liberal economically, but becoming more and more conservative politically, became anti-liberal. Now, I don't think that's the case in what I mentioned, the Dutch party. If you look very closely in what Mr. Rutte's party's VVD was representing, I think it's very far from being anti-liberal. But still, I think this is a strategy that's worth discussing. Very often you hear these arguments. Liberals can only be successful if they become more patriotic, even more nationalistic, more open to sentiments. Now, the second strategy is the direct opposite. It's to create an alternative, to be the most anti-populist party on the political scene, to be the most pro-migrant, pro-immigration, pro-European Union, pro-free market party that there is. And again, you see very good examples of this. I will again turn to the Netherlands and to the example of the smaller Dutch party, D66. Most of us are not necessarily familiar with this, but D66 is a social liberal party. It got more than 10% in this Dutch election. It increased its vote share a lot more than many other parties by doing exactly this, by advocating a common Europe, a federal Europe, by advocating a very pro-federalist message. Now, of course, the Netherlands, looking from Hungary, is a very fortunate country. They can have a more conservative liberal party winning the election and another liberal party becoming third in the election. Again, room for cheers. In Hungary, the numbers are a bit different. I was there just with a few friends. This is an anecdote, but I want to share this with you. When I was at the European Liberal Forum Assembly just a couple of weeks ago in Brussels, and we had the VVD and D66 campaign managers tell us of their success. And the VVD said about the D66, well, D66 is the party of the urban liberals, of the people who can spend a long weekend in New York and be very environmentally conscious and come back and be very tolerant. And I said, well, if you wanted to do a party in Hungary for people who can spend a long weekend in New York, be environmentally conscious and socially liberal, you would probably not get 10%. Even in the Netherlands, that's the top. But still, of course, it's a different society, it's a different environment. Still, building an alternative is what I would argue the French now president Macron did. He advocated a centrist, maybe radically centrist position, but the argument can be made that the French president's position is very liberal. It's pro-free market, it's pro-cultural liberalism, it's pro-EU. So even if in expression it's new liberal, in content it's very much the traditional liberal message. It has not much innovation there. Now, the problem with creating alternatives is, just as the first strategy had a problem, the second strategy also had a problem. If you look, for instance, at the British Liberal Democrats. The British Liberal Democrats tried the very same thing I just described. They tried to be the most pro-European party. They tried to be the most, the biggest opponent first of UKIP and then the Conservatives, and they lost horribly. They were almost wiped out, and even now, even though they seem to be recovering, they have a problem there. So this strategy might not necessarily work. And of course, the third option is ignore the issue. Yes, migration, EU, these are important issues, but the real important issue, so goes the argument, are economic issues. How much money you earn, what the taxes are, what education system we live in. So liberals should basically ignore these messages and just get on with the daily business of getting into arguments about what you do on an everyday level. Some might make the argument that the German FDP is doing something like this, focusing on economic arguments. I had difficulty coming up with a party that followed this strategy and was really successful, but of course many normal, regular liberal parties seem to follow this. So these would be the three strategies that I identify, and of course, as you saw, all three can potentially be successful and unsuccessful as well. So it goes and it falls to our panelists to maybe discuss these from a liberal or a not necessarily liberal standpoint. And these would be my concluding remarks, and just before getting over the panel again, I would like to thank everyone for coming here. We unfortunately and regrettably have an all-male panel. I'm so sorry about that. We had a lot of female speakers invited. They all canceled on us in the last minute. So this is exclusively our fault. And I thank all of you for coming at this late moment. Some of the people represent parties. Some of them are liberals. Some of them are not. We will have, I hope, an exciting debate in how you combat populism. But just as food for thought, we decided not to invite populists this time. So this is within the liberal circles. Most of you know that at other Republikon events, we try to have a debate with Fidesz people, with conservative people. But this debate is specifically about how you counter that. And we thought we would not necessarily invite someone from Fidesz to help us explain how to combat Fidesz. We'll do that next time. With that, I thank you for your attention and give the floor to Dániel Mikecz, my colleague at Republikon Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Csaba. Thank you. I'm Dániel Mikecz. I'm a researcher at the Republikon Institute. Please let me introduce you, our distinguished guest. First, Stefan Gara, who is a representative of the Austrian NEOS party. Then Zoltán Pogátsa, who I don't think he would label himself as a liberal, but he always kindly accepts our invitation to discuss with liberals. Then we have here also István Szent-Iványi, who is a former MEP, and also he's an advisor of the Hungarian Liberal Party. And we have here Dominik Kwiatkowski, who is a secretary at Nowoczesna in Pomerania. Nowoczesna is a Polish Liberal Party. And also we have Kester Eddy, who is a freelance journalist. He also writes articles to the Financial Times, Business New Europe, for example. Thank you very much for accepting our invitations. We heard from Csaba that how diverse liberals could be. In some cases, if we think about Hungary, for example, then we have liberal parties who don't claim to be liberal. And it also belongs to the diversity of liberals, I guess. So, and if already Csaba just drew up these three alternatives or these three different scenarios how liberal parties could combat populism, I would, so my first question would be if, in the case of your parties, or in the country you're coming from, or in generally, what do you think, which strategy could be more successful? Because it seems like that, well, maybe the populists are not really at our gates, and it won't be the year of revolution, as Viktor Orbán claimed. Stefan?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I'm actually half Hungarian. My father's Hungarian, but I don't speak Hungarian. Yes, to your question, well, I'm a representative of NEOS. I'm a member of the Vienna City Council and Parliament, and on my daily business we are confronted with the populist party. I would say in the case of NEOS it's a mixture of cooptation on the one hand, because I believe it's really important to understand the problem and to really also understand the concerns of the people. Because it's not so much about understanding the concerns of the populists, is to understand the concerns of the people. Because populists can only be strong if other parties, they don't just understand and neglect the problems of the people. And I think, as we said, actually, we're not a party, we are politicians coming and staying in politics actually for a shorter time. Yeah, so we're actually a people movement. Yeah? We're a movement, not a party, because most of us have not been in politics before, and we said, okay, we want to take the opportunity, spend some time in politics to really look and listen and hear what people think. And I think that's one of the issues. And on the other hand, we definitely are also in your model an alternative, because in Austria we are very clear a pro-European party. I would say the only still existing really pro-European party. And I think that's very important. So we are very clear on this. We are also very clear in terms of market, of course, understanding the issue and the problems of the people again. Yeah, so I think for us it's a mixture of both. I would not say we are ignoring the issues. So I think we really try to listen and to understand, because we believe that's a strong push against populism.
So you're not representing a political party, but as an economist, as a sociologist, you see probably actually the roots of populism or a demand of towards populism maybe differently as let's say the Hungarian liberals.
Yes, I would definitely not consider myself a liberal. I'm an economist and a sociologist, and if anything, I'm speaking from my political ideals lie close to Scandinavian social democracy. Just to make it clear what sort of position I'm speaking from. To answer the original question of which of these two approaches is helpful in combating populism, I actually think neither of these two are helpful. And I actually believe that you cannot fight populism from a liberal point of view. It's impossible to fight populism from a liberal point of view. Why am I saying this? Let's first define liberalism To me, liberalism means culturally liberal, economically free market. Social democracy means culturally liberal, economically pro-redistribution. So if we define liberalism and social democracy that way, my strong conviction is that you cannot fight populism from a platform which is culturally liberal but economically pro-market. Why can you not do that? Because I think that the key question about populism is not about on the supply side, it's on the demand side. It's not so interesting why Donald Trump is there in the United States. What's much more interesting is why so many people were prepared to vote for Donald Trump, why he's still there in spite of all that he's doing, why so many people are prepared to vote for people like that in other parts of the Western world, including Hungary in this sense. So the question is why there is an openness from so many people towards populism. And when I say populism here, I'm referring to the negative definition of populism, because obviously there is a positive definition which basically just means listening to the people and taking their views into account. But obviously we are here to discuss not that sort of populism, but the negative definition of it, which is about a demagogic, basically simplification, hate mongering, and the like. So why are there so many people who are willing to vote for politicians and political parties which simplify, which oversimplify, which monger hate, which create enmity between people, etc., etc.? That's the basic question. And my strong belief is that the reason why there are so many people like that is because of the lack of a good educational system. Markets cannot create a middle class. For a democracy, you need a middle class being defined as someone who is educated enough to understand the complexities of a political debate in the 21st century, which is incredibly complex. Middle class means somebody who has the material independence not to be forced into clientelistic networks. If you don't have that, and you're never going to have that on a market basis, I think there's plenty of empirical evidence that you can only have that with redistribution, with a redistributive state. You're not going to have that purely on a market basis. So there is no liberal response to populism. Liberalism creates populism, creates the demand for populism in this sense. The other problem is that when liberals take over social democratic parties, and that's what's happened in the last 4 decades, basically, with the so-called third way, Anthony Giddens, Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Gerhard Schröder, François Mitterrand, etc. Basically, there is no left-wing political party on the supply side either. So there's a massive demand because of the lack of understanding. People are not educated enough, and there is no supply of left-wing alternatives because liberals have taken over left-wing social democratic alternatives. That's the reason why we have populism. So once that's established, it doesn't matter what liberal parties do, they will never be able to combat populism. That's my belief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, István, it means that the Hungarian liberals could be blamed for the rise of populism in Hungary. You would think that you would disagree with Zoltán, and you would claim that actually it's possible to challenge populism from a liberal standpoint.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a surprise that I would challenge what Zoltán said and strongly disagree with him. I think that the major contrapunct of populism is the liberalism. It's not by chance that Mr. Orbán appointed as a major enemy the liberals. And he would like to build up an illiberal state. He speak about that, and he is very straight on that he finds the liberal principles as the major target of his policy, and he is a populist. It's without any question. In Hungary, the situation is much more complex because the populists are not at the gate, but the populists at the power. And of course, it's much more difficult to combat and fight if they have all possible means and ways to get through. That's the big machinery of propaganda and a huge budget and the massive state organs to support his idea. Therefore, it's an uphill battle for everyone, from left, from liberals, and so on. But on the one hand, what Zoltán said, that the liberalism created populism. I do not believe in that, and do not agree with that. I think that the liberalism is the only real answer of the needs that the populism with false claims would like to fulfill. It's not by chance that the liberal democracy is the major enemy of the populism everywhere. And what's the populism? We have to make clear and make a clear distinction that what is the real populism. Populism has three major pillars. One of them is the leadership principle. There is no populism without leader. They need it. That's the hardcore of the populism. The second important element is the anti-elitism, which is very important for populism, against political elite, but also the business elite, the media elite, the academic elite, against everyone. And the third one is against the liberal democracy, the basic institutions of the liberal democracy. They are dismantling the liberal democracy, and they would like to put aside and build up a system which based on the two elements, the leader and the people. Because ein Volk, ein Führer. That's an old principle. Or in Romania, it's very famous, the Ceausescu și poporul. That's Ceausescu and the people, and that's the two major elements. Zoltán said that the liberals cannot be successful against populists. It's not true. Just indicated Csaba before that, for instance, in Netherlands, the liberals could defeat from both sides, with both tactics. One of them is the VVD, the conservative tactics, to pick up and take over some elements of the concerns of the populists, and on the other hand, with the pro-European and pro-migration policy and a classical federalist liberal position, and they were successful. And however, Macron, I do not consider Macron as a clear-cut liberal, but he represents many of the liberal principles, and really he's running on the same ticket, and he was also pro-European and pro-free market and so on, and he could win. Therefore, I think that there are some counterfactual evidences that the liberalism can be successful. And if we call back for the old type of populism, because I consider to some extent the communism and the national socialism also as a sort of populism. However, they have a clear ideological background, which the modern populists don't have. But they have been defeated by the liberals. Therefore, I don't think that the liberal cannot win over the populism. That's a difficult battle, very difficult here in Hungary, that's true. The Hungarian liberals are tiny and not strong enough and not able to defeat alone, that's true. But I think that many people would like to reinstall the liberal democracy principles and the basic institutions of the liberal democracy, and they and the opposition and the protest, the growing opposition and growing protest is running on the liberal principle. Therefore, I think that liberalism may have a much better and stronger basis in Hungary than it is at the moment.
Thank you very much, István. Well, if it's about populism, mostly we discuss Viktor Orbán, and as he would actually an icon of the rise of populism. But there's been the first Kaczynski government in Poland before the second government of Orbán, and the moderate right could succeed over the populist Kaczynski government, and Nowoczesna was not actually on the political spectrum then. But so the Polish populism could have been defeated once. So when does it come to the next time, or?
Okay, thank you for invitation, and excuse me for my late. I just in my hotel opened the TV, and the first picture I saw it was Donald Trump. So I started quite hard day in Budapest. Yes, I couldn't switch it off. I don't know. When I was coming here, I was wondering when the populism in Poland really started. You said this first government of Kaczynski, 2005 until 2007, then earlier elections. But I think it was started in early 19th. In early 19th, because of the one party called Self-Defense. It was like horticultural party for the farmers, for people who lost some land, lost their jobs during the conversion from the communist economy to the open market. Then Kaczynski just used them. He invited them to govern the Poland in 2005. They have a coalition, because we have to remember that in 2005 Kaczynski with Law and Justice, his party, has like 27%. Other party, like some kind of CDU, we may say, had similar, and they discussed about coalition. They didn't agree at all, so Kaczynski created with populists a real government which lasted unfortunately 2 years. So it started then. It was defeated because I think of the leader. Kaczynski didn't hold being a prime minister. He's a good leader of the party, but doesn't really a good prime minister, like dealing with media, dealing with a lot of people, with lot of problems. So he led the government and lose the elections. But if we come back to these 3 points that Csaba just said, how to fight with populism, I was thinking the thing that Macron did. If you read the history of the Macron party, they start to speak with the people on the very base level. They start to check what the people are, what are the needs of the people. We started the same thing with Nowoczesna in Poland, like on the very basic level in cities, districts. We come to the people and say, let's create a map of your needs in your district, says what you need. We have our program, but you can be part of it. And I think that Poland, maybe Hungary as well, forgot to educate people after joining the EU. I will agree that I will not agree what Stefan says, that populists understand needs of the people. They understand emotions of the people. They use these emotions to rule. They don't understand their needs. They don't care. Actually, they use the refugees issue really badly in Poland right now, in a really badly way. The EU, they use, like Guy Verhofstadt is the main devil in Poland, you may say. Yes, I met him on Sunday. I think the problem is to start speaking again with the people from the liberal point of view, in the way like this meeting we have today, because that's what Kaczynski did to win the last elections. Kaczynski creates some kind of small intellectual, we may say, clubs, when they gather people in small cities, saying, what are your needs? We are law and justice. We can offer you this, this, and this. We want to rule the country. And they say, first, like 5 people were coming on this kind of meeting, then 10, 20, 500. That was, we think, the reason that he won the elections, because he was listening of the people on the very basic level. And for the educational reason that we lost this fight with the Kaczynski being in the EU. When we joined EU in 2004, before this joining EU, the Polish put real pressure on the education about Europe. In schools, on universities, in TV shows, showing what good we can get from the European Union. Free market, lot of investment, infrastructure, traveling without borders, etc., etc. But after 2004, we forgot saying this. What good we get from the union, and then the populists start saying what is bad in the union. That you cannot produce your own cheese because it's not healthy, etc., etc. That Timmermans and Juncker are you know the best guys, the worst guys in the world, and right now Donald Tusk. So I think there's a chance to beat the populism by going back to the speaking with the people. Also about emotions, also about understanding the emotions. The refugee crisis doesn't help us at all because we may say it was the failure of European Union. Nobody was prepared for such a big problem, and that's why populists, especially in Poland, use it. For example, at my last sentence, I will tell you that in Poland, actually, Nowoczesna is the only party who say we have to take part with the support for the refugees. We are the only one party. We said it on our last Sunday convention. We said that we need to be responsible for all Europe. We are the only party. Every party, like Donald Tusk, the European Union president, his former party, saying one day we are against refugees. Second day, exactly on Monday, he said we want to take the refugees. On Tuesday, he said we will take some of them. On Thursday, he said we want to take illegal immigrants. Nobody knows what does it mean. And on Friday, he says. Maybe we will take, but we don't know how many, because right now there is no issue. So being responsible in politics, I think, and facing the problem of the low support for the parties, it's a challenge for the liberal. But I think going back to the education issue can solve the problem. And I think that if we really start to speak with people, we'll win this battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Kester, you're in the position that you're writing about new member states to readers from old member states. So do you see any difference between West and East populism? Or because, well, it's a phenomenon that I'm very happy because I'm a political scientist and like I go to conferences to talk about Orban, and it's the same like talking about Donald Trump. So I'm really happy with that from an academic aspect. It's interesting, but is there any other huge differences, or it's just the same?
Yeah, East and West. Well, one thing I was pondering this whole conference, you know, and I mean, I was pondering these questions even before I was asked to come up here, as I guess most people in this room have been as well. And a thought struck me, for some reason. If you go to the region of Goriška Brda in western Slovenia, you probably go there for the wine, which is very nice. But if you keep your eyes open in some of the villages, like Dobrovo, you will see in big white letters on some of the houses the words "Tukaj je Jugoslavia." And if you don't speak South Slavic, it means this is Yugoslavia, which may perk your interest. If you know anything about the history, this was written up after the Second World War because the people that in that region had a really rough deal from the fascist Italians. And they wanted, this area was up for grabs by the United Nations or whatever it was in those days. And finally, that area was voted to be part of Yugoslavia, and the area around Trieste was voted to be part of Italy. Now, interestingly, 45 or so years later, the people of Yugoslavia, people of Slovenia, sorry, are there any Slovenes here? Hi. I think it was 92%, wasn't it? They voted to leave Yugoslavia. So why am I telling you this story? Apart from the fact I had to say something. I mean, the Slovenes are considered a very conservative and traditional people, I think, in many ways. And they were able to forget the misery of the time under the Italian fascists, and maybe they had a more miserable time in their opinion. But anyway, the point was, memories fade, and fortunately the Italian systems had become much more European and liberal, so in fact they get on very, very well now, as far as I know anyway. You can sort of, some of the wineries are actually sort of straddling the border. The problem is that, and I quite like what Dominic said in many areas, that we forget, and we have to try and make reasoned decisions based, we all do, on our experience. And, you know, being a Brit, I do have my criticisms of the European Union, but I've often thought when I was younger, and I used to hitchhike around Europe a lot, sleeping out, you know, it might get cold. It did get cold sometimes in winter, and I used to think, bloody hell, you know, what would it have been like in 1915 in the trenches? Forget the bullets. Just think what it would be like in the trenches. Just the mud. I'm sorry, the shit, the wet. It must have been bloody awful, apart from the bullets. And the European Union was very much founded by people who remembered the horrors of the Second World War and said, we don't want this again. We don't want this to happen again. And now we've come, rather like Slovenia has come, into what you were saying. We've forgotten what it was like. In Hungary, in many ways, forgotten what it was like under communism, or they see it through rose-tinted glasses. Yeah, sure, you know, you could go down to Balaton and in the 1970s, and it was the happiest barracks in the Soviet bloc, etc. But of course, it was supported on credit largely. And so, how do we get these? What we're asking is, and also Zoltán, I think you were stressing education. Of course, that's part of what we need, but it's not only what we need, because if you think about it, the best educated country, state, arguably in 1930s was Germany. And look what happened to them. So it's not purely education. There's certainly a need to question. And one of the things I see in Hungary, I'm mind-boggled, frankly, over some of the pathetic excuses that come out, which aren't for policy and which aren't questioned. I mean, the government says, regardless of your views on nuclear power, maybe nuclear power could be a good thing, but the government says that this POX 2 will not make Hungary more dependent on Russia. What? I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. Of course it makes it more dependent. You may agree in that, accept that. You know, I'm not got a problem. Well, I have, but, you know, that's my problem. But to argue such basic nonsense, and, you know, the people follow, you really got to think, what makes people question and assess in a sort of deeper way? And coming back to the sort of historical lessons, I don't have an easy answer. I mean, I've talked to my daughter. I've tried to tell her, you know, she lives in London now, you know, she's flying in this week. She flies here. She's done more miles than I've flown all my life. And, you know, I just try to tell her, you know, sweetie pie, when I went to Czechoslovakia in 1973, you know, people didn't do that on their own. And my friends really were worried I wouldn't come back. You know, the world has changed. But how can we explain the changes and somehow, without lecturing our kids, which of course, you know, I don't want to do, without lecturing anyone, just somehow, how can we gain wisdom and get people to vote? Because, as you say, we need to think ahead of what these decisions mean. But in fact, instead of becoming a newspaper society, we become a Twitter society. And that, you know, that's a great challenge, I think, for anyone who's responsible. And I'm sure everyone in this room is seeking to be responsible. I haven't really answered the question, have I? Never mind. Politicians don't. Maybe I should go into politics. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before we would actually open the floor, Dominic, you talked about the how actually liberal politicians should approach the people. And I saw that actually Stefan was agreeing. And I know that at the NEOS, you have the NEOS Lab, which is an affiliated organization. And there people can be engaged. Not necessarily they won't become party members, but they can be engaged. And I just love, let's make just a run before we would open the floor. What do you think, what could be the role, first of all, of civil society in combating populism? And how should those who like to combat populism deal with the media, with social media, let's say, because this was actually a well-discussed issue during the American campaign, that actually it was Twitter which created the whole Trump phenomenon. Stefan?
Yes, first of all, I think what's really important about NEOS as a people movement is really the possibility of engagement. So anybody can take part in designing the program. Anybody can take part in setting the priorities, what is really important for the people. So I think this is radically new. You don't have to be a party member. Anybody can participate in internal elections. So we are really a very, very open party. And I think that's the basic of NEOS, yeah, to have this open mind. So in this case, it's this cultural liberalism, as you mentioned. Yeah? And I think that's one of the ingredients, I would say, what's really different to existing parties in Austria. And in terms of social media, I would say, from a positive point of view, NEOS actually only made it in the national parliament the first time because of social media. We would not have the chance to do it, we would not have the money, but we really looked into and took social media in a positive way. Yeah? And I think what you mentioned in terms of social media, I would say it's really important to understand social media, because social media are emotional media. So it's very much about emotions. And I think what populist parties, right-wing parties all over the place in Europe really can do very well is to really tackle this kind of emotions. And just because you mentioned, I said, for me it's really about the emotions. It's not that they are really understanding the problem of the people. They're really playing with the emotions, and this is what they really can do best. And I would say we have to learn. And our response is the same. We also have to be emotional in a positive way. Yeah, to really, what you mentioned, all the success stories in a positive way. Because we actually, in terms of, okay, fighting this elite, we are too much in our brains and too few in our stomach. Yeah, to understand what is the need. Yeah? What are the positive pictures? They're not only negative pictures. What are the positive pictures? And I think this is the way also to campaign. And this is also a way to be successful against really populist parties. And I think for the old parties, it's very, very difficult to handle social media. Yeah? They do it in a way that populist parties can easily overcome them. And I believe there is a case, there is a success story for these new kind of movements like NEOS. And we were really founded, and we do understand how social media works. And I think we can set an example in a positive way. On the long run, I'm very positive. On the long run, I believe that a lot of different parties will understand how social media works, how we can really make these emotions in a positive way. Because we always see that populist parties, once they're in government, yeah, then they have to prove what they say. And we had the same case with the Freedom Party in Austria. And if you look back, then you see what really happened there, with a lot of scandals and so on. Yeah, of course, people forget, but I think it's important that we understand social media in a way and use them in a positive way as a tool to counter populism. And you can also say populism actually is a strategy of marketing in a way to really focus on the customer. Yeah, and so we have to understand that's also a strategy. Yeah, and we have to learn from this strategy and use it in a positive way.
Zoltán, what do you think? What could be the role of civil society, or if you want to reflect on what Stefan said?
I think civil society is incredibly important. I think, in fact, any actor which is not politics is incredibly important. I think we wouldn't be here where we are today if for the last 2 or 3 decades we would have had stronger social actors to counter politics. I think there was too much politics, too much decision making which centered and focused eventually on the politician. The politician in Eastern Europe has been the omnipotent decision maker in the last 20, 30 years. If you saw a newscast in Hungary, you asked a civilian, but the civilian was, you know, always in the wrong, never in the know. They were always the misguided civilian who doesn't know. That you asked the civil society activist, naive idiot who believes in something. Then you ask the expert, another naive person who has the knowledge, but no one listens to him, her, etc., etc. And then at the end of the newscast, you always had the politician, and the politician made the final decision, and everybody was paying attention to the politician. Now that kind of prepared the ground for Viktor Orbán, who is the ultimate impersonation of that politician who wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning and makes all the decisions in the whole country from 6 in the morning till 2 a.m. the next night. We prepared the ground for that by not having enough counter forces. We would have needed much more of civil society, much more of trade unions, much more of employers' associations, much more of regional and local governments, media organizations, etc., etc. Could go on and on and on. The list is long. We should have had much more negotiations, interest harmonizations. We should have empowered and elevated other actors in society to the level where politicians were. And I believe in Scandinavian social democracy where nobody knows politicians. I always ask my students, how many Scandinavian politicians do you know? They always say, well, Olof Palme, because Olof Palme was shot. Nobody knows any other Scandinavian politicians. It's completely the opposite of Hungary, where everything revolves around one person and people expect one person to solve the problems of an entire society. So civil society is incredibly important. But let me emphasize once again, I don't believe civil society can strengthen on a market basis. You will never have that. Civil society needs a middle class. Middle class people are active in civil society. You will not have that on a market basis. If you don't have redistribution, you won't have strong civil society. This is exactly what we had in Eastern Europe. We had a very, very, very shallow middle class because of the lack of redistribution. Therefore, when populism threatens civil society, it's very easy to crush it because they don't have it. As for social media, I mean, I'm a big fan of social media. I'm Facebook day and night, but Facebook and social media is just a platform. It's not particularly important. It's just one way of getting to people. It's just a platform. I would put much more emphasis on public media. I think public media is much more important than social media. In Denmark, 73% of people watch public media. And Scandinavian public media is incredibly, incredibly good quality. So a large part of the reason why people are very well informed, why you cannot find them with populism, why they're not receptive to populism, is because they have incredibly high quality public media, which people watch and listen to, and they get a lot of information about the world from public media. So when populist, demagogic, simplifying, hate-mongering politicians come, they'll be immune to these ideas because they know better. The reason why they know better is because 73% of people listen to public media. So you need a strong middle class. And I'm sorry, but Macron only got 23%. The reason why he won in the second round, because a lot of other people voted for him as well. So Macron isn't a good example of countering populism. Without the other political currents, he would not have won. As for the Dutch liberal parties, same thing. Holland still has a strong middle class. The reason why the Netherlands still has a strong middle class is because of the redistributive welfare state that they have. People might end up voting for liberals. If they become middle class because of the welfare state, they might end up voting for liberals, ungratefully. But that doesn't deny the fact that the reason why we have such a strong middle class is because of the existence of a strong welfare state in Scandinavia, in the Benelux countries, in Germany, in Austria, and many, many other parts of the world where there is a resistance, there's more resistance to populism. And I think that Western European populists and Eastern European populists are different. I think that's something that's worth pointing out as well, that if you listen to a Dutch populist, they will tell you that the reason why they vote for Wilders is because Muslims come and they want to stop us from the way we live. Muslims don't like gays, Muslims don't like the equality of women, we do, and therefore we want to protect our way. You'll never hear such a thing from an Eastern European populist. You'll never hear them wanting to protect women's rights or gays' rights. There's a huge difference between the Western European and Eastern European populists, I think.
But I think once, maybe it was Viktor Orbán or another Fidesz politician, once he said that Muslims do not tolerate Jews, and this is the government also protects Hungarian Jews as well. So it's a bit similar, but just a bit. István, please.
Thank you. I would start with the good news, and then a bad news is coming. The good news here in Hungary is the critical mass is in place and already exists. According to all the polls and all the surveys, the majority of the population are against the populist power. If you look at the approval rate of the EU, or if you look at the approval rate of the liberal democracy and the major liberal principles, they are in majority in Hungary. That's really a very, very good news and a prospective and promising news. But the bad news is that the Hungarian society is very much atomized, very much fragmented, and the political parties are rivaling with each other and do not have any common platform. And even the civil society is very much opposing and protesting, or at least making a distance between politics. I do not agree what Zoltán said on that, because I think that even the opposite is true, that the strong prejudices and the strong refusal on behalf of the civil society you can find here in Hungary against the political elite and the political parties. However, at the ultimate end, at the election, not the civil society is running at the election and will win or lose, but the political parties. Therefore, the political parties are indispensable to reinstall the liberal democracy in Hungary, everywhere in Europe, and everywhere the parties are fighting at the final end. Of course, the civil society does have a very important role in that. They are the major allies of the parties, because they are also suffering under the populism very much, and they are also targeted by the populist power, and we have a common ground of interest. Unfortunately, in Hungary, due to the past and to many reasons, we are not going into details, there is a strict division line between the civil society and populism. But I would like to challenge what Zoltán said on the redistributive state and the role of the redistributive state in that. In Hungary, the redistribution is very high. Huge. It's higher than in many Scandinavian countries. It's around 50% of the state, the GDP is redistributed. In what way, that's another question, but the redistribution is high. And I do not think that's the major task the government to create the middle class. The middle class has been created in Britain, in the United States, many other countries, by itself and by the market forces and by many different things. Not the state establish and create the middle class, and especially not the civil society. We have got some civil societies created by the state and the government. CEF, the Hungarian knows what I'm talking about. That's not a real civil society. The dependent civil society is not a real one. The good civil society, in my view, which is really independent and which is really based in the society and the social fabric, and gets the support from the citizens, and which reflects the citizens' needs and not the government actions and government creation. That's it. And one more element I would like to indicate here. Kester just made an indication on that. What is extremely difficult now that we are countering a new type of populism now. You know, this populism has been always the part of the political life, and liars and demagogues and the old type populists have been part of the political life for centuries. I would say it's not a different. But the conventional liars has some regards to the truth. They know what is the truth, but they would like to convince and persuade the audience about the opposite, on purpose, because they lead to that. The post-truther, that's the new type of populists, are completely different, because they are not interested in the truth. They are, in that sense, postmodernist. They say that there is no truth at all. There is this construction, it's a social construction, and political construction, and there are only narratives, different narratives, and you are right, I am right, and everyone right. And that's the world of the alternative facts. You indicated that. That's the Hungary doesn't depend on Russia if build a Paks second. It's not only a lie, but it's completely an alternative world. And we are living here in Hungary, in the government propaganda, in a world that is completely different from the reality, and therefore it's very difficult to fight against that with the facts. Usually, the traditional populists can be defeated by the facts. They say they have some false claims, and you can say it's not true, but they do not have any claim for truth. They are completely unindependent from that, and therefore the situation is more difficult. And how can we boost the resilience? Because that's the key word, I think, the resilience against the populism, the immune system of the society. And it's very difficult. The social media role, it can play a role, but I have also some doubts. Some concerns and doubts with the social media. The major problem of the social media, that's usually it's creating some opinion ghettos where the like-minded people endorse each other. And very difficult to get through this, because usually they are connected with like-minded people. Not everyone, of course, but many of them. Therefore, very difficult to targeting. And very good for the populists and for the post-truther, because they have some own clients which can be targeted, and you cannot really reach them because you are not in the same circles. Therefore, I don't think so that it's a magic. And another important thing, that's the micro-targeting. And the other thing which is very dangerous here in the country, the macro-targeting. The government is very strong in that. The macro-targeting means that they can reach those people who are not interested at all in the politics and in the news, and they are not listening to the news and not watching the television, nothing. But they cannot escape and avoid the billboards, the posters, the national consultation. National consultation, maybe the foreigners don't know that. Now there's the 6th national consultation. That means that every household gets leaflets and the questionnaires, even those who don't know anything about the things and are not interested at all, but they got it. They got the local, that's the free of charge newspaper regularly, and so on. They are targeted, those people who you cannot reach in any other way, only if you have so much money and so many means and possibility to reach them. And of course it's very difficult to fight against it, because we have a relative limited surface where we can appear, and only for those who are at least interested to some extent in the politics. And we cannot really reach those who are outside of that, but they are also voters, and many of them are not going there, but some of them are going to vote, and they got only the information from this macro targeting that we difficult to counter.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I saw that you made some notes, so you have
too much notes.
Too much.
Because István, I totally agree about fighting with the facts that you said, but I'd like to go back to the civil society. Then my friend from Russia who's working with the homeless people told me one day when we were talking about the condition of the non-government organization in Russia, he said, no, there is no non-government organization in Russia. I said, why? Because for the government who is non-government is against government. And the same thing is happening as I look in Hungary in many ways, and the same things happen in Poland. That's the first fact that civil society based on the activity of the people. People often goes to the non-government organization who supports society in different on the different levels in different very hard duties. I actually working for the homeless organization since I start working. So we are a non-government organization, and the Law and Justice and Kaczynski start fighting against non-government organization about a year ago. Not only this one who were sponsored by foreign donors, but also for the organization who are like helping disabled people. And you know what the society reacts? They say, "Why are you fighting with them? They're helping us in every day." So I think it's one of the points. First of all, education. Second, gathering non-government organization, people from the culture, intellectualists, who are also against the changes, because these changes actually in Poland put us more in hands of the Russia, though Kaczynski said is always against Putin. But the truth was that what Macron says, we are really Kaczynski, Orban, and Putin. That's a one team, actually, and people see that in Poland very more often. As a social media, I'm not really convinced that social media could be a key to win with populists, because in Poland, Kaczynski win elections also using social media on a very high level. They put a lot of money for, we call it trolls, the people who just write messages for money, and they do it again all the time. If you just tweet something, if you have some kind of article on the website, you will see the commentaries. There are like 2,000 commentaries like "Go to hell," we will kill refugees, oh, you want to sell us to Brussels, etc., etc. They paying for each one about 50 cents, and that's the truth. They supporting it. So there are some places in social media that reasonable people don't even go there, because they understand that it's fight one against another. In Poland, there are 4 million people having a Twitter. So that's the second. The third, I think that we have to convince people that they should go to the elections, because Kaczynski won because a lot of people didn't go voting. It was like less than 50%. Less than 50% people go voting on the most important elections. And for me, this is most important thing. You see that in France, in the Macron, when Macron won, there was like 73%, I think. They said, oh, that was the lower amount of people who go to the election. 73%. In Poland, this never happened. This never happened even on the presidential elections. So we have to push people for the voting, because Kaczynski win the elections, because a lot of the people says, I don't want to go vote for the Tusk, for For the government, I just stay home. I don't care about Kaczynski. And they wake up on the Monday and said, "Oh my God, what has happened?" So the elections. I totally don't agree with Zoltán and with the redistribution. Totally never will be agree about the redistribution. I work with social service with homeless people. I know how the social service look at the lower level and then the highest level in the Ministry of the Social Affairs. It's not the key. I always argue with the socialists who show us an example of the Scandinavian countries. It's a good example for the countries who are at the same level. We are not. Hungary doesn't have so much income to the budget. Poland as well. We didn't have like 50 years of the Marshall Plan, European Union, etc., etc. We were demolished by the Second World War. It's good to have money to spend on the people, but redistribution, no. We have the biggest program of the redistribution in Poland. It's called 500+. That's how Kaczynski win also the election. They said, we will give for every child, every month, 500 zloty. For every child. You have a child, 500 zloty each month you will get. Just like that. With no reason. Like we don't know, we don't care how you spend it. It's for the child. And they say, oh, it's good because the people will have more children. Another day after the election, yeah, we'll give you this money, but not for every child, but for the second child. But it will be still 500. It cost in this year 23 billion zloty. 23 billion zloty, supporting people and not even knowing what is happening with this money. Of course, people who love their children will invest in their future, maybe in education and everything. But there's a lot of people who just use this program and kill the social service. Like social workers says, we don't have influence on that people who are like drug addicted, alcohol addicted. They're receiving money from the government for nothing, and we don't know how to work with them. That's the pathology, and I will be always against giving money for nothing. And for some, I don't remember. Somebody says about protecting the women in Poland. Populist party says, yeah, you are against women, your liberal party, because you want to take refugees. They will rape your women in Poland. That's yesterday. Our member of parliament from Gdańsk said this. That's Nowoczesna is against women because we are pro-abortion. And feminist party as well. He said we are against women because we want to invite the refugees and they will rape our women, and like in Germany, etc. And my last sentence, I think that fighting against populism, I think that Stefan said also a similar thing, need to be done, not similar as Macron did, but I think the people need positive challenges in the countries. It's like why Kaczynski win after 8 years of quite good times in Polish society. There was Prime Minister Donald Tusk, and like nothing was happening in the country. We call it warm water. Like there was a politics of the warm water, that you have warm water in your house and everything is okay. If you had cold water, that would be a problem, but warm water is enough. It was like 8 years of having quite good economy, but they didn't reform anything, like trying to keep their power and try to govern all the time, and they lose. Like they didn't show the people the positive challenges. For me, it's the important to say to people, yes, our country can do like great positive thing. Let's make this program, let's make this plan, like to inspire people also, because maybe then this 10-15% people who are staying at home and say, I don't care about politics because nothing really important happened, and they staying not voting, they said, okay, that's the good challenge. Let's do it. We Polish, we Hungarian can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kessel, please.
Yeah. I'd also like just to come back to what Zoltán said to some extent in the redistribution theory. The alternative argument, Zolly, is that the middle class grew up because entrepreneurs were allowed to make money and create wealth. I'm not saying which is right. I'm just sort of offering another alternative to that. And also, you talked about the wonderful Scandinavian public service media, which I don't know Scandinavia, but I'm sure you're right. But that really shows a respect for the rules, because I'm sure all those Scandinavian media have some kind of rules, not 3 minutes for the left and 3 minutes for the right, not exactly like that, but it's more the spirit of the thing, I'm sure. And that's what's missing in some of these countries. There is no respect for the law, for the rules, or the ethos, not just the rules, the ethos of media. I watched Hungarian Television 1 in the early days of the second Orbán government, sorry, because it was a very good clue as to what the government was after. If you watched, maybe some of you remember it. Every time there was something bad about supermarkets, guess which company logo was in the background? Tesco. And every time there was something good about prices of things, it didn't necessarily show the logo, but you could tell which shop was in the background if they didn't use the spokesman for that shop chain. I won't name it, you can guess. But anyway, maybe my Hungarian friends can correct me, but what's amazing now is the way, I was at the referendum, I was at the Fidesz headquarters, and they had TV1 on, Magyar TV1 of course on there, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, previously, 5 years ago, they would have some kind of token opposition statement, which might be quite weak or miserable or make them look stupid or whatever, or it might even support their argument in a sort of positive way, but usually it was some sort of short thing. At the referendum, it was a procession of government politicians or ministers, and then when they went to the analysts, the independent analysts, I didn't see Csaba on there at all. I saw Századvég and what's the Nézőpont. I mean, who are, anyway. I mean, and if people are prepared to put up with this, I ask you, what can you do? I mean, people should be out turning off. Well, anyway, they shouldn't be. I mean, if they're accepting this, it shows two things. It shows one that the media is completely dominated, whether by orders or by themselves to do this, and it shows that the public are prepared to put up with it. One thing which is common, going back to the question previously, thank you, sorry for, one thing is common that I see in all populists, starting with, well, I'm sure even before Lenin, but, is they work on their quick answers on resentment. They work on, you are being screwed, you are being downtrodden, you are being cheated. Now, in some cases, some of that might be true, but they have a quick answer that appeals to the emotions. I'm very much strong on this. We're all emotional beings, and we have to kind of check ourselves, I think. Am I going down this path? So if we're talking about fighting populism, I think there's different levels. One of the things that you can see, both in Trump and here, and I suspect in Russia, though I don't know Russia barely at all, is the quick answer, the repetitive answer, and a strong. In Hungary, they try to get the emotions worked up, very much. And if you've got the emotions worked up, people don't think, people don't question. So we have to try and train people. And I guess NGOs have part of that, as well as schoolmasters and schools. You know, it's a huge question, I think, how to get this, because the Scandinavian democracies and the Scandinavian respect for media didn't come about like that. You know, it was built up over years. And what we've done here, you know, you said, Zolly, the last 20 or 30 years the politicians have been in charge, but I think you could say that forever, isn't it? I mean, since the Turkish rule, the politicians have been in charge. So in Hungary, which is the country I know best in the region, it seems to me there is a willingness, as you say. Well, the bosses know, you know, deference, bend the knee. And when they work on this resentment and get the people's blood boiling, you've lost them. I mean, they're lost to reason. So then the facts won't work. I don't know, it's a case of, I guess, NGOs, teachers, churches, you know, all trying to try and make people reasonable. And that's a will. I mean, that's something within the people. If you don't want to support that, you know, I had a row with I won't say any names because I can't even remember his name, last week with a churchman, a major churchman here, and he said, "You're a liberal, you know." I don't know if I am, by the way, but anyway, I wish when I see him next time, if I see him ever again, I should say, why do you label me? Why should you label me? It just you know, the answer, I think, is he's comfortable with that. He can then switch off. You know, actually, I told him, my right-wing friends think I'm a lefty, and my left-wing friends think I'm a righty. So, you know, I kind of... Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have time to open the floor. If I'd like to just sum up some things, I think it was what you mentioned, all that more political engagement or more political participation is somehow necessary to combat populism. But now then, I want to open the floor. Please, if you have questions or comments, then please raise your hands. If not yet, then Zoltán, I saw that maybe you wanna reflect on what Kester said.
Can I just reflect on a couple of things? Starting off with this issue of post-truth, and István, I very much agree with you that post-truth is a very dangerous phenomenon, and if we continue to live in a post-truth world, that will be incredibly dangerous for all of us. But let's try to think about how post-truth comes about. And I'm afraid that when you say that redistribution is high in Hungary, that's where I pin down where post-truth comes from. Why do I say that? First of all, and that's something that experts very often say, and I think it's part of, you can sort of use this as a case study of why people begin to distrust experts and why anything goes becomes the rule once people begin to distrust experts. Why do I say this? If you actually look at the official redistribution rate in Hungary, i.e. what percent of GDP is used, constitutes the revenue of the state from taxation, you actually see that the redistribution rate in Hungary is exactly the same as the EU average. So it's no higher than the EU average. It's actually almost exactly the same, a little bit lower even. When people go to hospitals and schools and they hear from experts that we have a very high rate of redistribution, and what they see is very bad quality schools, which is something that PISA and OECD also tells you is actually the case. We have very bad quality hospitals, which once again, you know, data confirms is the case, etc., etc. And if you actually look at how much the Hungarian state spends on education, how much the Hungarian state spends on health, you'll find that we spend 2 to 2.5 percentage points less on education than a typical Western European country. We spend 3 to 4 percentage points less on healthcare than does a typical Western European country. We spend 7 percentage points less than on social policy than does a typical Western European country. We spend 1.5 percentage points less on retraining than does a typical Western European country. And I could go on and on and on about how we actually spend less proportionally, not in absolute terms, but proportionally from our GDP. Now, it's very nice to say, Dominic, that you would like parents to spend on the education of their children. What we have in Hungary, about 1/3 of the population, sometimes even 40% of the population, who live below the living wage, who live below a subsistence wage. A subsistence income in Hungary means you don't have enough income per month to spend on healthy food. You don't have enough money to spend on enough carbohydrates, protein, vitamins. These people have no savings. Every second year, we have a survey which tells us that 4 out of 5 Hungarian households do not have non-property savings, which could cover any major cost. Now, if 4 out of 5 households have 0 savings, and wages are incredibly low, you can't expect families to spend on their children's education. So when I say welfare state, I'm not talking about giving money freely to people which they consume. I'm talking about investing in education, investing in healthcare, investing in the health of the population, investing in retraining, something that creates a strong middle class. Now, when Kester, you say the alternative hypothesis is that entrepreneurs might have caused the middle class or might have created the middle class. I don't think that's the alternative hypothesis. I think that's exactly the same hypothesis, because redistribution allows entrepreneurs to thrive. Without redistribution, you won't have entrepreneurs. We won't have the bottom 4, 5, 6 deciles of the Hungarian society will never be entrepreneurs if you don't have redistribution. With the shitty schools that they go to, with the underfinanced, collapsing hospitals that they get their health care from, they'll never be entrepreneurs. With a lack of demand because of the low wages, there's nothing to be an entrepreneur for. In large parts of this country, there is no point in trying to be an entrepreneur because there's no local demand. So it isn't like redistribution or entrepreneurs create a middle class. Redistribution creates enterprise, allows people to become entrepreneurs, which then creates the middle class. That's how it's done. Now, if experts keep telling people that we have an overly high redistribution rate, and in reality we have, why is it that the redistribution rate in Hungary is average, and that yet we spend such a small proportion of our GDP on education and healthcare? Because the state swallows it. It's the state which spends a lot of it. They spend it on completely unnecessary things, luxury expenditure in many cases. That's where it goes. It doesn't go to redistribution in the sense of investment into human capital, which would create a middle class and, by the way, would make Hungary more competitive. So we're not creating a middle class with this redistribution. A very small segment of society consumes it. And this isn't only the Orbán 6 years. It's the last 30 years which have been working exactly the same way. We have data for it. It's empirically proven that this is how it has been for the last couple of decades. So if you don't have that redistribution, you won't have a middle class. If you don't have a middle class, there will be people who are ignorant, people who don't understand the complexities of society, and they will be very susceptible to somebody coming along, first of all, offering them clientelistic livelihood, and that's how it happens at the local level, clientelistic livelihood, and demagogic explanations of the world based on simplifications and hate-mongering. The reason why these people are receptive to this, and the reason why we are not receptive to this, is because we are middle class and we have received the education from wherever, and we know better. But we must give a chance for other people to also know better and also be able to withstand that kind of demagogy.
Thank you. We have time for for brief reflections. Stefan, you like to?
Yes. I'd like to give you a counter argument. I believe Austria has is a strong welfare state. Extraordinary high redistribution. We have a very good education system. We have the most expensive healthcare system, yet the system is going down. Yet a lot of people can actually not go to a hospital and they go to private doctors. Yeah? So this is like very interesting, yeah? Because the problem we have is we have a lot of party politics in all these systems. Yeah? So we have a long, old structures, and these old structures don't work. And even if we have a high welfare state, we have a strong right-wing populist parties. Yeah, so this is actually not the case with Austria. So it purely shows that this actually is not the solution. Yeah, so I believe in this case, what we really need is to open up, and I strongly believe that especially the education system is key. But we have to open up the education system, because now, especially in Austria, we still have a system where party politics is really present. Yeah, so we do not have the diversity of the education system that is necessary, yeah, for the young generation. Yeah, and I think that that's key. So, just redistributing, I don't believe this is the solution.
How do you explain then the people who voted for the far-right candidate? So what is your account of why there is so many people in Austria who voted for this populist right-wing candidate?
Because a lot of people have the feeling that actually economic development is now going down and they're losing. So the next generation is not gaining, the next generation is losing. Still, it's on a very high level, extraordinary high level compared to Hungary, but they have the feeling we're losing. Yeah? So we are the losing generation. Yeah? So I believe we have a lot of inefficiencies in our system, yeah, and therefore it's necessary to open it up, yeah, have this kind of new movement that takes into account and really is against party politics in a lot of those structures. Yeah.
Yes, István, please.
Thank you. I'm not convinced by Zoltán arguments on the redistribution. You know that there are countries where are high redistribution, and the well-functioning welfare system, and the strong populism. There are many. And there are countries where the low redistribution, like Britain or United States, and strong populism again. I don't think so that it's a strong correlation between them. And as far as the redistribution concerned, I agree with the argument that the redistribution in Hungary is high and not efficient. That's true, and I do not agree with the composition of the redistribution. But it means that the redistribution in itself, it's not the solution. It's not the key. And of course, we have some philosophical differences. I do not believe in the state so much. I don't think that the state can resolve many of the problems. They have some important roles in the society, but I don't think so that everything should be resolved by that. The state should create and help and facilitate the things, but not exactly doing that. That should provide the opportunities and should provide the facilitation, and all others is coming from the other actors. For instance, the civil societies, the NGOs, and many others. And that's the healthy society. And redistribution is high in Hungary, and populism is also high in Hungary. Don't have any close correlation between them. What's the reason of the populism in the Western countries? That's an important question, and Zoltán has a quick answer for that. That's the liberalism. I don't think so. On the first hand, I don't think so that the last decades have been liberal at all. That it has been there have been liberal elements in the Western societies, but it was not a liberal society in the sense that it's ruled by only the liberal principles, and especially not by the liberal parties. It's mostly ruled by social democrats and conservatives. At the moment, in the European Union, there are only 7 governments ruled by liberals, and mostly the small or medium-sized countries. None of them of the big four countries. Sometimes in Germany that was in coalition, and previously in Britain that was a coalition, the Liberal Democrats. But it is not not usual and significant. Macron can make a change, but I do not consider him as a clear-cut and clear liberal. However, he represents many of the liberal principles. Zoltán said that Macron did have only 23% in the first round and did not win. Of course, that's true that he has got 23, but that was the first, and was more than the populist. And in the second one, when there was a clear competition between a liberal politician and the populist, he has got 65%. With the help of many other voters, since they were not all of liberals. I wouldn't say that liberals, but the people have to choose between liberalism and populism. 65% choose liberalism and not populism.
Thank you, Dominic. If you would give us a brief reflection, because we're running out of time. Thanks.
Okay. So as Zoltán says, totally agree that redistribution to the education or healthcare system, it's true, it will help society. But the Poland is the good example when the populist party give a lot of money to the people, redistribute it, and win the election. So as the István says, it's not a good example with the redistribution. I think I was reminding when the populism was winning in Poland, when you were speaking, but I was also listening, and why this has happened. And in 2005, when Kaczynski won for the first time, it was because the Social Democratic Party loses because of the large scale of the corruption in Poland. The people see that politicians were stealing money, just like that. It was like, why here corruption? They'll sell some land. They sell something. Somebody broke the law and they didn't do nothing. Then the Kaczynski came. Let's clean everything. Said, we will kick their butts. So that was the first time. Second time, also Kaczynski won last year because there were a few scandals with the corruption in the former government, and he said we have to clean it up. We have to clean it up. So that was the example of the populism in Poland. And my last sentence. I think in Poland, the problem with the populism, it's also because of the construction of the parties. We have big parties who are like two leading parties. The biggest parties are like big corporations, something like that, because they have like 50,000 people who involved. These people need to earn money. They have to like earn money for them. Their leaders need to earn money for them. So scared of losing power, giving the populist place for it, and that's why I said in my previous speech that the leading party, who is like more like CDU in Germany, said about refugees, we don't want them. Yes, we want them. We don't want them. They were looking what the opinion of the people was and try to behave good because they have high percentage of the support in the media. So I think that's also the problem. The politicians who are in the parliament for like 25 years and cannot work outside of the parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Kester.
Yeah. What comes over to me in a lot of this discussion is the whole characteristics and fabric of society and how they all interplay, so that one form of action in one society may work and it may not work in another. And yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you, of course. In fact, it's one of my major points as well, criticism of this government. Hungary will never be rich while 1/3 of its population is in misery and has, hasn't got the clothes to go to school on, let alone go to school. I fully agree with you, and that needs to be addressed. But it's interesting, gosh, it was a long time ago now, the Jewish charity system or social security kind of support, which came from within the Jewish societies in Europe, they had a social system, but it was almost shameful to be using it, but people would use it to get out of their mess. And of course, that's really the critical aspect of redistribution. Can you use it, and do the recipients respect that, basically, and then use that in society to come up? One thing of so where are we? Just trying to think. Oh yes, something you said about the Kaczynskis. One thing so interesting about this whole sort of Trump and this populism is, you make the slightest factual mistake or slightest error, and they'll jump on it, and they'll promise to clean it up, etc., etc., etc. And yet somehow they appear, and their supporters appear, impervious to when their own parties lie, make mistakes, or whatever. Another thing for this region, which is, I don't know, it's me that says this, I don't know anyone else who says it, but it might stir some pigeons amongst the cats, is what I find in Hungary is that if you went on the street and asked, do you accept Marxist-Leninism as a realistic ideology, if the people on the street understood your question, then you mean communism, almost, I would say 90% would reject it, for sure, even the socialists, because there's no real Marxist-Leninist political party now. But if you said to them, what word do you associate with the word speculator? Immediately they would say, oh, that's bad, that's bad. And Orban is using this just recently, the word speculator. A speculator to me is a neutral thing, basically, and yet Orban used this again in the nationalization of the pension funds. He said people shouldn't have funds speculating on their future, because some of the pension funds, about 7%, was in the stock market. And immediately, the word speculator used that way is negative. So to me, a lot of society, the impact of communist education is still very strong, and it's very subtle, but it comes out in that form. If you're using, and yet of course, if you look at the home loan situation with Swiss francs all the way through in the 2000s, everyone was a speculator. Actually, every Hungarian that took those home loans looked at it and thought, aha, this is a good way to, avoid paying the real price, which was 17, 18% interest rates on the forint at that time. And they took out these home loans. Then, of course, when it all went wrong, it was a case of please help me out. And not, if it had gone the other way and the banks had been hit, of course, none of us would have tried to support the bank. So anyway, this is really questioning and understanding what these words mean. I think that there's a huge need. I don't know about Poland, but there's a huge acceptance here. Oh, the state says it, or the masters say it. We don't question it. Thanks.
Thank you. So it seems that you all agree that education, whether formal or informal, is crucial in combating populism, just like political participation. And about the role of redistribution, then there is going to be probably debates on that in the future. I'd like to thank you for our guests to accepting our invitation, and thank you for you as well. I guess if you have any more questions, then we can continue it here at the MAGVETtomn CAFÉ. Thank you very much.